Good to be with you this morning. Thank you all for being here. I know we have a long agenda. I talked to several board members yesterday, and Ms. Hardy, you and I talked about this issue that's come up. She asked me to address the issue of this education jobs bill that Texas was apparently the only state that was required to make additional assurances to receive these funds. We're, in the process of negotiating with the U.S. Department of Ed to try to secure these funds for our schools. It works out to about $830 million, as I said, designed to prevent school districts from having to lay off teachers during this school year. The provisions that were added to the bill required Texas to assure that we would continue current level, not just current level funding, but proportionate current level funding through the year 2013. We ran into a stumbling block with our Constitution that says that no legislature may bind another or future legislature, and no appropriation may be made beyond 2 years. So we have a legal stumbling block. We've been working very diligently with the Department of Ed. The Secretary of Education yesterday said he believes that Texas will receive the funds. I'm hopeful that we will receive the funds, and we're pursuing every possible opportunity to get those funds to our school districts. That being said, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I know we have a full agenda, so I'm happy to talk about that or any other issue that y'all have.
Mr. Mercer.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just to rehash, and I know you know the answer to this, but for the record, I mean, Texas was the only state of 50 states that's not allowed to do it just per student. 49 states can do it per student, but this extra rule is done just for Texas. Is that correct?
This provision applies only to the state of Texas. As a matter of fact, the headline on the subsection of the bill says additional provisions applicable to the state of Texas. So we are singled out by name. The other thing that it does is every other state can decide how to distribute the money. Texas is required to distribute the money per the federal Title I funding formula. If you run the funding formulas by school district, about 66% of Texas school districts would have gained more money under the state formulas than they would under the federal formulas. So 2/3 of the districts actually lose money under the federal formulas. It tends to drive money into inner city areas versus suburban and rural areas using the federal formula.
That's exactly what I found. The 1,200 ISDs, about 800 actually lose money.
852.
And my 12 counties that are a lot of suburban and rural counties actually lose money.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate circumstance. I've worked on the federal Title I formula before. I understand exactly what its purpose is. It's much like our state comp ed formula, but when you're talking about the purpose of the bill was designed to preserve teacher jobs. If you want to preserve teacher jobs uniformly across the state, you would do so based on a weighted average daily attendance, because that more closely associates with teacher jobs in school district budgets than does the federal Title I formula.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Ms. Hardy. Just a clarification, Robert. You're saying that it was in the Doggett amendment that said it had to follow the federal guidelines, or was that in?
No, that was all in the Doggett amendment. That was it was one amendment that said these provisions are applicable to Texas only. Texas must assure that it's going to spend the same proportion of education funding through 2013, whereas other states only had to make that assurance for 1 year. And then in addition to that, it said, if you get the money, we're going to tell you how to distribute it through the Title I formula. You may not determine how to distribute it. Their argument was that for some reason, when we received the state fiscal stabilization funds last year, they argued that we spent it inappropriately. I went to the Department of Education and asked them if we distributed that money differently than any other state. The answer is no. We distributed this in the same way that every other state did. As a matter of fact, some other states actually cut education funding. We did not. So I don't believe we did anything outside of the law, outside of what the department asked us to do. As a matter of fact, and this is a very important point, the department specifically said to states, do not use that federal stimulus money to create what they called a funding cliff, and that was just punt a bunch of money into education for 1 year, and then that money goes away, and then you wind up losing jobs, or you have a significant decline in education spending. So with that warning in mind, I think the legislature acted appropriately in spending those dollars and not creating an artificially high amount. It's interesting too because you hear a lot of stories these days about our budget shortfall, and I'm not a budget person, but the numbers that are being thrown around range, 10 to 20 billion dollars. Well, if you had taken those funds and added them on top of education spending last session, just imagine you're increasing that potential budget shortfall by about $3.2 billion. So whatever exorbitant number you can throw out there, you could add $3 billion to that because you would have spent more money and set your baseline higher. So it's a bit odd to me that people who are arguing for fiscal constraint and for states to tighten their belt would argue that we should have spent that money in this way and increased funding in a way that we couldn't sustain. It would be like a school district spending their fund balance on recurring expenses.
Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner?
Mr. Mercer?
One more question. I remember that, again, this is, to make it perfectly clear, 49 states are allowed to do it by a weighted average daily attendance. It is a jobs bill to keep teachers. I remember there's always a courtesy when a bill is written for one area, that the delegation from that area would be polled and say, are you for or against us? In this case, our 2 U.S. senators, our 32 members of Congress. Did the majority of our delegation agree with this, or do they oppose it?
Well, the majority of our delegation voted against it, but the majority of Congress voted for it. Both of our senators have expressed a desire to repeal this language. I believe legislation has been filed to repeal it. We are working with the department to either have it negated or find some other mechanism for us to adhere to their requirements without violating our state constitution and laws.
What I meant was, again, in the State House and in the U.S. House, too, it was a common courtesy when there was something that was explicit for one area, one part of Texas, or one part of the nation, in this case, one state. It was a common courtesy. Since it only affects this one state, you would have asked that delegation, are you in favor of this or not? And what I've seen, the numbers are the 2 U.S. senators and 32 members of Congress, at least, I think, 22 to 10 oppose this measure.
Yeah, it is something I have never seen before.
I've never seen it before. Never. Common courtesy to ask the delegation who's being specified, do you oppose this or agree with this? And that was not done.
And I appreciate that. And regardless of party affiliation, I have never seen anything like this before. And as many of you know, I've worked for Democrats and Republicans, so it's not a matter of party for me. And as a matter of fact, one of the members I worked for was a Democrat, and one of the most proud moments that I can recall was he was presented with an opportunity to benefit his district at the expense of the state of Texas, and he turned it down and said, no, I will not betray my state. And I was extraordinarily proud of that gentleman for standing up for Texas, and have been disappointed that we haven't seen more of that.
Other questions for the Commissioner? Ms. Dunbar.
Is there any possibility that Texas may actually oppose this as an unconstitutional usurpation of federal legislation through our states' rights? I mean, it's totally unfair. It's picking out Texas. There's, I don't know. I mean, are we just going to basically lie down and take this if they don't?
As I said earlier, we're exploring every conceivable option. I would simply say stay tuned.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.